On the evening of September 2nd, 1998, New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport moved through its usual rhythm of long-haul departures. Travelers checked in for overnight flights to Europe, families said their goodbyes, and aircraft prepared for transatlantic journeys across the North Atlantic. Among them was Swissair Flight 111, bound for Geneva, a routine international flight operated by McDonnell Douglas MD-11. It was expected to be an uneventful crossing, one of hundreds that take place every single day. Nothing in those early moments suggested that within an hour, this flight would become one of the most significant in-flight fire accidents in modern aviation history. The aircraft was a McDonnell Douglas MD-11 registration HB-IWF delivered to Swissair in 1991. By the evening of September 2nd, 1998, it had accumulated 36,000 flight hours. The MD-11 was a wide-body trijet derived from the infamous DC-10. Fitted with 3 Pratt & Whitney PW4460 engines, it was equipped with a recently installed in-flight entertainment network or IFEN system in its first and business class sections, a passenger entertainment system Swissair had added to attract premium travelers on their flagship service. The flight carried 215 passengers and 14 crew members, a total of 229 people. Many passengers were United Nations workers and diplomats traveling between New York and Geneva, earning the route its informal nickname, the UN Shuttle. The flight crew on this flight was highly experienced, with Captain Zimmerman, 50, had been with Swissair since July 1971. He began his career as a first officer on the DC-9 and had accumulated approximately 10,800 flight hours, of which 900 were on the MD-11. He was also a rated MD-11 instructor. A former Swiss Air Force fighter pilot, Zimmerman was described within the airline as precise and methodical, someone who created a professional and friendly atmosphere in the cockpit. He was due to turn 50 the following day. First Officer Stefan Loh, 36, had logged approximately 4,800 total flight hours, including 230 hours on the type. He was an instructor on the MD-80 and the Airbus A320 and had served as a Swiss Air Force pilot from 1982 to 1990. Flight 111 departed JFK at 2018 Eastern Daylight Time on September 2, 1998. For the first 52 minutes, the flight was routine. The aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 33,000 feet and tracked northeast over the Canadian Maritimes toward the Atlantic. At 22:10 Atlantic Daylight Time, at around 52 minutes after departure, First Officer Loh noticed an unusual odor in the cockpit. Seconds later, Captain Zimmerman spotted small whiffs of smoke curling down from the ceiling near an air conditioning vent at the rear of the cockpit. A flight attendant was called in, confirmed the smell, and at Zimmerman's request, closed the air conditioning vent. The smoke briefly seemed to dissipate. The crew assessed the anomaly as likely related to the air conditioning system, a type of incident that is normally benign and easily resolved. 4 minutes later, at 22:14, the odor returned and the smoke reappeared. It had not gone away, so the crew decided to weigh the diversion options. At 22:14, Captain Zimmerman called Moncton Area Control Center, the ATC facility responsible for Nova Scotia airspace, and declared pan. He requested a diversion to Boston, approximately 300 nautical miles behind them, noting that Swissair had a maintenance facility there and that he knew the airport. Moncton ATC, however, offered the closer option of Halifax International Airport, only 66 nautical miles away. First Officer Loh accepted the diversion to Halifax. The crew put on oxygen masks and began descending. Captain Zimmerman assigned Loh control of the descent while he worked through Swissair's 2 checklist procedures for smoke in the cockpit, a process estimated to take approximately 20 minutes. At 22:18, Moncton handed off traffic control of Flight 111 to Halifax Terminal ATC. At 22:19, Halifax advised the crew that they were 30 nautical miles from the airport. At that moment, the aircraft was at 21,000 feet. too high to land directly. Low requested more distance and time to descend safely. At 22:20, Low told Halifax ATC that the aircraft needed to dump fuel. The MD-11 was significantly over its maximum landing weight for the amount of fuel on board for a transatlantic crossing. Halifax vectored the aircraft south towards St. Margaret's Bay, where fuel could be jettisoned safely over the water while remaining within roughly 40 nautical miles of the airport. The crew then executed a step in Swissair checklist for smoke/fumes of unknown origin. They shut off the power to the cabin electrical bus. This action also cut off power to the recirculating fans in the cabin ceiling. Above the cockpit ceiling, invisible to the crew, a fire had been burning for some time, fed by the thermal and acoustic insulation lining the aircraft's interior. The recirculating fans had been circulating air through the ceiling cavity in a pattern that particularly restricted the airflow to the fire. When the fans switched off, that changed. The fires found a new airflow pathway and accelerated rapidly into the cockpit area. And within seconds, the autopilot disconnected with a loud warning tone. 22:24:28. Low informed Halifax ATC, "We must now fly manually." 17 seconds later, at 22:24:45, Swissair 111 Heavy is declaring emergency. Multiple aircraft systems began failing in rapid succession. The autopilot was gone, one of the two flight computers lost power, a yaw damper failed, the flight data recorder began shedding parameters as it lost contact with sensors. The aircraft's transponder stopped broadcasting, and Flight 111's altitude and identity disappeared from Halifax controllers' radar screens. Somewhere in the final seconds, Captain Zimmerman left his seat. The fire had broken through the ceiling into the cockpit. The cockpit ceiling was quite literally melting. The Swissair volume of checklist was later found in the wreckage, fused together by extreme heat, possibly used in a last attempt to beat back flames. At 22:25:40, the flight data recorder stopped recording. 1 second later, the cockpit voice recorder went silent. The aircraft briefly reappeared on radar at 22:25:50, and then disappeared again shortly after. Its last recorded altitude was 9,700 feet. At 22:31, the MD-11 struck the surface of the Atlantic Ocean at approximately 345 miles per hour in St. Margaret's Bay, 8 kilometers southwest of Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia. The impact was felt in buildings and disrupted television sets up to 15 kilometers away. All 229 people on board were unfortunately killed. There were no survivors. The first people at the crash site were local fishermen from the communities of Peggy's Cove and Bayswater. They had heard the impact and had headed out into the dark water without waiting for instructions. What they found eliminated any possibility of survivors. Debris and bodies scattered across the surface, no life rafts, no signs of life. Canadian Navy and Coast Guard vessels arrived within hours. US Navy ships joined the effort. The official classification of the operation shifted from search and rescue to search and recovery on the evening of September 3rd, approximately 24 hours after the crash. Though for those on the water, it had been clear from the first hours. At its deepest point, the wreckage lay approximately 55 meters below the surface of the water. The recovery operations was conducted by an array of organizations working out of CFB Shearwater, a Canadian Forces base near Halifax. An estimated 2 million pieces of debris were recovered from the sea. Each was cleaned, photographed, weighed, and placed in a hangar at CFB Shearwater in a grid system representing the sections of the aircraft. More than 350 investigators from multiple organizations participated, including the TSB, the US NTSB, the US FAA, the Swiss Air Accident Investigation Bureau, Boeing, Pratt & Whitney, and the Airline Pilots Association, and Swiss Air. DNA specialists at RCMP Forensic Laboratories identified more than 100 victims through personal effects and blood samples. The majority of the 229 victims were positively identified within 10 weeks of the crash. The cargo hold contained valuable items, including diamonds, jewelry, and a fragment of Pablo Picasso's painting, La Pientre, reportedly worth millions of dollars. A 9-meter reconstruction frame was built at CFP Shearwater to allow investigators to physically reassemble the forward section of the aircraft piece by piece. The final phase of wreckage recovery used the ship, the Queen of the Netherlands, to dredge the seabed. It concluded in December 1999 with 98% of the aircraft recovered, approximately 127 kilograms of aircraft debris and 18,000 kilograms of cargo. The Transportation Safety Board of Canada led this investigation, and the final report was released on March 27, 2003, nearly 4.5 years after the crash. The investigation determined that the fire originated in the upper right area of the cockpit ceiling. This was the attic space above the flight deck, an enclosed region not visible from the cockpit and not monitored by any fire detection or suppression system. The most probable ignition source was electrical arcing, a short circuit in wiring running through that ceiling space. The wiring most strongly suspected of involvement was associated with the aviation system, or the in-flight entertainment system, which had been installed under a supplemental type certificate. The material the fire fed on was the thermal and acoustic insulation blanket lining the interior of the fuselage ceiling. The insulation was covered in a material called metallized polyethylene terephthalate, or MPAT or MPET. The MPET covered blankets had passed the flammability test required for aircraft certification at the time. Tests did not accurately replicate what happened when the material was exposed to sustained heat in an enclosed aircraft environment. In the attic above the cockpit, MPET ignited and sustained a fire with far greater intensity than the certification test had captured. The TSB identified 11 clauses and contributing factors. First, and the most prominent, was the aircraft certification standards for material flammability were inadequate in that they allow the use of materials that could be ignited and sustain or propagate fire. The investigation also established that the aircraft had no fire detection systems covering the attic space above the cockpit. There were no smoke detectors, no heat sensors, and no suppression capability in the area. The only warnings available to the crew were smell and the occasional wisp of smoke that drifted down through the air conditioning system. Warnings that gave no indication of how advanced the fire had become. The TSB concluded that the action of shutting off the cabin electrical bus, a step taken in accordance with the approved Swissair checklist, had inadvertently accelerated the fire spread by altering airflow through the ceiling cavity. The crew had followed the procedures correctly. Those procedures applied to a situation they had not been designed to address, which therefore contributed to this unfortunate outcome. On the question of whether earlier action could have saved the aircraft, the TSB determined that even if the aircraft had proceeded directly to Halifax without diverting to dump fuel, it would have still been unable to land in time. The fire was too advanced and progressing too fast. By the time the first wisp of smoke entered the cockpit at 22:10, the situation was already, in terms of time available, beyond recovery. The crew was cleared of any wrongdoing. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder both stopped recording approximately 6 minutes before impact, when the fire destroyed the aircraft's electrical power. Those 6 minutes from the moment the recorder went silent to the moment the aircraft hit the water are unrecorded. The crew's final actions, their last communication with each other, and the sequence of failures in those last minutes can only be partially reconstructed. The TSB issued 27 safety recommendations. The FAA issued Airworthiness Directive AD 2000-11-02, which was mandating the removal and replacement of all MPET thermal acoustic insulation blankets from Boeing DC-10 and MD-11 aircraft. The IFEN system was disconnected from Swissair's entire MD-11 and Boeing 747-300 fleet on October 29, 1998, less than 2 months after the crash. The crash struck Swissair at a moment when the airline was already under financial pressure. The reputational and operational consequences of this accident compounded difficulties that had been building for years. The entertainment system blamed for the fire had been installed specifically to attract premium passengers, an investment that contributed to the airline's financial position while introducing the wiring that likely started the fire. Swissair went bankrupt in October 2001 following the further disruption caused by the September 11 attacks. Its international traffic rights passed to Crossair, which took over the route network and the fleet and was renamed Swiss International Airlines. The flight designator for Swissair's New York-Geneva route was changed to SR-139 after the crash. The route continued to be operated by the MD-11 aircraft. The TSB's final report did not conclusively identify the specific wire or component that initiated the arc. The investigation established that the electrical arcing in the wire near the aviation system was the most probable cause, but could not determine the certainty with which the wire or connection had failed first. Swissair Flight 111 remains one of the worst mid-air fire disasters that has ever happened in aviation history. And to this day, it reminds us that no amount of entertainment and systems are more important than human life. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it if you guys could like and subscribe to this video. If you would like to see more plane crashes or list videos about plane crashes or any such topics, please let me know in the comment section down below. But like always, I hope everyone stays safe, and I will see you all in the next video.